almost 28 delegates. Ashok One Hospital has done a great job throughout this COVID pandemic. Some rumors were also viral. To know more about the actual reality about Matthew sir and also about his hospital and some useful tips about ventilator, we have with us Dr. Matthew sir, director of Ashok One Hospital. To moderate the session, we have with us leading consultant from Dahisar, Dr. Chirag Shah sir. Vote of thanks will be given by our senior family physician and past president Dr. Ashok Sanghvi sir. To introduce our speaker, Dr. S.P. Matthew sir, we have with us from Dahisar, Dr. Rajendra Patil sir. Over to Dr. Rajendra Patil. Rajendra, unmute yourself. Dr. Rajendra.
Good afternoon, friends. Yes. Good afternoon, friends.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
I am audible.
Yes, sir. Audible, please.
I am audible.
Yes, yes.
आवाज येत नाहीये.
Good afternoon, friends.
राजेंद्र. Unmute करा.
Yeah, we can hear him. We can hear Dr. Patil.
Sir, your voice is audible. Please say.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, audible.
Yes, I am audible.
Yes.
Yes. Now it is audible.
Good afternoon, friends. I am Dr. Rajendra Patil. First of all, I would like to thank the webinar committee for giving me this opportunity to welcome today's speaker, Dr. S.P. Matthew sir. Dr. Matthew sir has done his MBBS from KM Hospital and MD Medicine from St. GS Medical College. He has been practicing as a consultant physician in Dahisar, Borivali since last 1966. He has a special interest in improving safety and quality in healthcare. He also believes in team-based approach to whole person care. Welcome to sir. Now I am hand over to today's host and speaker, S.P. Matthew sir.
Thank you so much.
Hand over to Jignesh sir.
Yeah, Dr. Jignesh.
Yes, sir. Proceed further, sir.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am practicing in Dahisar since 1996 and not 66.
Welcome, sir.
So, Dr. Ashok Sanghvi will know that better. I will just share my screen now. So, as many of you may be aware or may not be aware, I myself got tested positive for corona, and I'll just share in brief my experience of how it was. And then we will talk about something very practical regarding the use of ventilators in the ICU. So that will be the main outline for today's session. So my experience with corona now, when the first corona case came to India, it was I think around Jan, and by the time it was around Feb, March, we were seeing a rise in cases, and then the Prime Minister announced the national shutdown, because of which all activities ceased and there was a lockdown everywhere. Now, in that time, we were actually seeing cases, but we were actually not aware of what to do exactly with these patients. Same thing with our hospital. We kept our hospital open because primarily it's a medical hospital. It's not a surgical or gynec. So we continue to see all cases of fevers and things like that. And we were actually wondering what to do with this. In the initial phases, the BMC used to tell us not to test unnecessarily. There was a lot of restrictions on testing, as a result of which many cases were probably not diagnosed also. We had our first positive case in the end of April. Actually, in the 1st of May, we had our first corona positive case. The gentleman presented with syncope and was presented like a stroke. And there was no history of fever given at the time of admission by his relatives. After a few days, he started developing breathlessness. That's when we suspected corona, and that's how we got our first case. And then the BMC came and they gave us instructions on what to do. We did the RT-PCR at that time for all our staff, and all of them tested to be negative. We continued to treat cases, and I also knew that at one time there would be some or the other doctor or nurse or somebody getting positive for COVID despite all the precautions. I am 50 years old and I don't have any other pre-existing diseases. in the end of August, the first week of September, I actually started getting a funny sensation in my head, like a headache and fever. And that's when I started thinking that probably this fever is something which I never usually get fever. And I also taken my influenza vaccine. That is one more thing I wish to tell you. On my 50th birthday, I took my influenza vaccine. That was last year on November. Because I feel it is easier to remember when you take the vaccine, if you take it on your birthday. And after that, I did not have any cold or fever either. So this happened in September 2020. I took my influenza vaccine in November 2019. Yeah. So this time when I had this cold and this flu-like thing, I thought, okay, it could be that the vaccine effects are wearing off. And I took rest at home. And I started monitoring my temperature. And as you can see from this chart, on the 4th of September onwards, my fever started increasing and it went up to 100, 101, 102, and even at one stage up to 103. And all that time I was feeling quite terrible. I was having a lot of body pain and then I was having some muscle cramps. I was monitoring also my pulse rate and the pulse rate graph, because I wear the Fitbit, so it keeps recording my heart rate. And as you can see from this, for those 2 days, that is on the 4th of September, Friday, and Saturday, that is 5th of September, my heart rate was persistently above 100 all the time. That means this is the first time in my life I remember that I was having fever continuously for 48 hours. I took paracetamol initially, but that also 650 mg paracetamol as per my body weight. But even after that, the fever hardly went down by few, 0.2 or 0.3 degrees. And the fever also continued for the next 48 hours. This is on the Friday, the 4th of September, and Saturday, the 5th of September, I had very high fevers continuously. I did the blood test immediately on the first day itself. I did the routine tests. All the tests came to be normal. Even my CRP and LDH and ferritin also was normal on those days. So I did not know what it was, whether it was what type of fever it was. I did not have any diagnosis at that time. At the end of 48 hours, that is Friday, Saturday, on Sunday, my fever totally subsided to around 98.6 degrees. And after that, I did not have any fever. My appetite also came back. So I thought, okay, I will take rest for a day or two and I will resume my work. That is what I thought. On Sunday, I took rest. Monday also, I took rest. On Monday evening, the secretary of the building called to tell me that the next door flat, there are 6 people who have tested positive for corona in my building on the next flat. And that actually, if some of you may know Dr. Alok Shah, his brother stays there. So his brother and his parents were there. So they tested positive at that time. So then immediately the BMC advised to seal the floor, the floor in which we were staying, the 10th floor. And they told me that if you want to continue work, you should get yourself checked with the rapid antigen test. So on Tuesday, I went for my test, even though I was not having any fever. And the rapid antigen test came positive. So then I realized that this fever which I had, this high fever with this tachycardia, was the coronavirus. And that's how then I took rest for the next 2 weeks. I was home quarantined. I must share that in that time I did feel a bit of tiredness, and on the a few days after this diagnosis, my sense of smell went down by 50%, but that also recovered after a few days. So I was resting at home, and as you can see from this chart, this tracks my activity during this time. So if you see from the 5th of September till almost the 20th of September, I was at home and I was only doing video consultations with a few of our patients from the hospital. And also, since I'm part of the Borivali Medical Brotherhood CHIC program, I was also monitoring patients of COVID who were detected positive and on home quarantine through video calls. So that was all I did. So as you can see, my activity level and the steps and everything went down in those days. to around hardly 2000 steps in a day because I was basically confined to my bedroom. So, but I just took multivitamins. I did not take any other antibiotics or any other medicine for that matter. I just believe that my immunity is there, which is giving me, doing whatever it is required, that the human body knows what is required. It has been fighting infections for hundreds of thousands of years. And we know that the immune system is so complex that it can handle any virus or pathogen. And in fact, it is doing that every day, and every moment of every day, our body is protecting us in ways which we don't even realize. It's only now that we have these markers to track down the inflammation, so the CRP and things like that. So I did my tests. I'll just share the tests also. I'll just see where it is. Yeah. So I did some tests, and of course, I had these fearful thoughts. I must share that because this is a place where we must be honest and also share that even though I was a doctor and I knew that there was all these things happening in the body, but still, when we see the news and we get the WhatsApp forwards and various other things going on, invariably there does come that fear in the mind. Okay, what if I develop this and what if I develop that? So that is where I realized that these fearful thoughts, we have to shut it down before it enters our mind. And as I tell my patients also कि आपका घर का दरवाजा होता है और वो दरवाजा बंद रहता है, कोई अंदर आता नहीं है. So these thoughts, once they enter, they then play havoc in your mind. So it's important that we fill ourselves with faith. That's what is my personal experience, that God has made us perfectly and he loves us and he has made us healthy and he desires that we be healthy. If that is the way our mind and body thinks, then immunity also will be good and it will work at the optimum. That's what is my personal experience. So I was just thanking God that, okay, I had gone through this experience, but I kept myself away from that fear and the tensions of thinking about unnecessary things. And I realized that as I was doing that, my immune system was working perfectly. It was doing whatever it was required in a very nice way. Appetite came back, my energy level started increasing, though there was a bit of tiredness. And that's how I recovered. And I also went through the tests again. I did my repeat tests after almost 10 days to check my CRP, LDH, interleukin 6, D dimer, and all those tests. And the interleukin 6 was around 2 points more than normal, but the CRP and other levels were totally in the normal range. So I'm glad that I feel that sometimes the fear itself plays havoc with the immune system and it creates a lot of abnormalities in the way our immune system works, because fear releases two main hormones, the adrenaline based hormones and the steroid or the prednisolone and this type of what we use in the practice. Okay, you can see the steroid metabolism also starts increasing because of anxiety and fear. So I feel it's important that our bodies be rested and reassured so that our immune systems can work perfectly. The other thing I realized that no matter what precautions we take, somewhere or the other we may end up getting, if not from the workplace, it may be from your neighbors in the building who may not be, taking the precautions like how your colleagues in the hospital are taking. So it could be anything. So I feel that it is important for us to take precautions, but also at the same time, even if you happen to get it, don't worry about it. Be relaxed and confident that your bodies are built with that proper immune system. So these are the small things I wanted to share with you, that be positive, have faith in God if you believe in that, believe that your body is amazingly designed, exercise regularly. Yeah, so that is one thing which again I want to encourage you all to please take time to take care of your bodies and exercise at least for 30 minutes every day. Even a simple walk will do, or even if otherwise at home also you can do exercises, that also is fine. And keep fit and be honest about your worries. If you're feeling anxious about something, please share it with someone, maybe it with your family members or with your colleagues or whoever it is. But it is important to have a circle of friends with whom you can share things that are happening in your life. Connect socially with others. I believe that we should use the word physical distancing and not social distancing. And please keep connected with others in the field. That is very important, I feel. So this is all for my presentation for Corona. And Dr. Jignesh, should we go ahead with the other presentation or should we ask some questions here and then go?
No, sir. Questions will be at the end of the session.
Okay, okay. Fine. So I'll just stop this sharing and let me just start the other presentation also in the meantime then. Just my next presentation is on ventilators, ventilator use. Abhi nahi. Ventilator use in the ICU setting. So ventilators, as you are aware, have been used in medical care for a number of years. So I will just put on the presentation right now, and just share the screen. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Can you all see this screen? Yeah.
Yes, sir,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So the next topic, what I'm going to talk about is on ICU and ventilator management. Basically, I've made it at the request of the Daisar Medical Association specifically. So in brief, what about, I'll try to sum up some basic simple facts about ventilators here. So why do we use a ventilator? That is the first question that we always ask. So there are basically a few indications where ventilators are required. One is if there is a person who is not breathing, so what we call as bradypnea or apnea with respiratory arrest, then ventilator is the treatment of choice, class 1A indication. Second, if there is an acute lung injury and acute respiratory distress pattern, then also it is indicated. Thirdly, if the patient is breathing but the respiratory rate is more than 30 breaths per minute, then it is very likely that the patient will go into fatigue very soon. So one will advise the use of a ventilator. The fourth is a bit technical. Basically, the vital capacity being less than 15 ml per kg. That is again something which needs to be measured. So I'm just mentioning it as one of the indicator. And the other second most one of the other indications is when the minute ventilation is greater than 10 liters per minute. That means the patient is having a tachypnea with again with the increased tidal volume. So these are the common indications for using a ventilator in the ICU setting. So what is mechanical ventilation? So basically, in a very simple term, mechanical ventilation is a treatment to help a person breathe when they find it difficult or are unable to breathe on their own. So a mechanical ventilator pushes airflow into the patient's lungs to help them breathe. Now, before ventilators were discovered, there used to be something called as a mechanical lung, which was actually a big device, a box into which a patient was put. And there used to be negative pressure created outside to enable the lungs to expand. It used to be called like a bellows system used to be there. The patient used to be kept in that box covered from the neck down, and negative pressure used to be applied from outside to enable the chest to expand. That was the initial days when before this type of ventilator started with positive pressure started coming in. So right now what we are talking about in mechanical ventilation is that positive pressure which pushes air into the patient's respiratory system. Okay, now there are two common types of ventilation. One is a non-invasive, which involves various types of face masks. And the second one is an invasive, in which there is intubation, which is involved, endotracheal intubation, which can be either nasal, oral, or tracheal intubation of the airway. Now, in respiratory mechanics, I'll just give you a brief physiology of it. That normal inspiration generates negative intrapleural pressure. So this negative intrapleural pressure basically creates a gradient for the air to go in. And that is how it is in normal. But in the mechanical, the pressure gradient is resulting from positive pressure at the air source. So the source of the air is your ventilator. Ventilator has a compressor which pushes the air inside. So that air goes into the lungs. So the peak airway pressure, if you measure the graph of the pressure in the lungs, the on the x-axis you see the airway pressure, it is going up and up and up. It reaches the peak pressure, then there is a hold, and then there is an expiration. So that is how usually every cycle of the ventilator is pumping air inside. So the pressures result from the inspiratory flow resistance. There is a resistance. The lung is like a balloon. So when you're pushing in air inside, there is a resistance. That is what it depends on the elastic pressure of the lung, the elastic recoil. And also there is something called as a positive end expiratory pressure, which is present at the beginning of the breath. The moment you start breathing, already there is a positive pressure in the lungs, that is a PEEP. This is also adjustable by ventilators. Now the means and modes of ventilator, mechanical ventilation, there could be volume cycled ventilation or there could be pressure cycled ventilation. Volume cycle means that we set a volume of air that has to be pushed in with each breath, that is the tidal volume. And usually it is as per the weight of the patient. So this volume cycle delivers a constant volume with each breath. And so in this, you must remember that when you're pushing in, suppose 400 ml of air into the lungs, the ventilator will push 450 ml inside, irrespective of what the pressure inside the lung could be. So there is a problem if the lungs are not very elastic, that you're pushing in and the pressure inside the lungs may increase and some alveoli may also rupture. But that is part of the volume cycle treatment. So we have to decide carefully in which patients we can give volume cycle ventilation. The next more common mode is pressure cycle, in which a pressure, so we set a maximum pressure. We say, okay, 18 centimeters of water pressure should be reached. Beyond that, air will not go into the lungs. So then that is called a pressure cycle ventilation. So in which the pressure is set. So then the volume may go up and down depending on the pressure of the lungs. And there is a combination of volume and pressure cycle also, which is available. Okay. Now in assist control modes, what are the things that are done in assist control modes? So in assist control modes, as you can see, the modes maintain the minimum respiratory rate. So there's a minimum respiratory rate which is set. And also because the pressures and volumes are directly linked by the pressure volume, any given volume will correspond to a pressure. So what happens here is that, as you can see over here, the graph of the pressure and the volume, both of these things are shown on the ventilator. So we can actually make out from this, lot of data is generated from the patients when they are in this modes by the ventilators. So that is about the assist control modes. Then we have, after that, we have the adjustable ventilator settings. So there are a lot of settings which can be adjusted for different things, like the respiratory rate, the tidal volume, the trigger sensitivity. So trigger sensitivity basically is that if a patient is breathing and trying to take a deep breath, so we set a trigger for, okay, when the patient's inspiratory effort goes to -2 centimeters of mercury of water, -2 centimeters of water, the ventilator will then send the air inside. So that is a trigger. So the ventilators can also be selected to have a trigger. So the trigger sensitivity is possible. Then the flow rate can be determined. The waveform, which has to be seen on the ventilator, also can be seen. And the inspiratory expiratory ratio. So the inspiratory expiratory ratio is important in patients where the lung compliance is not good. And we can adjust the inspiration and expiration depending on the elastic recoil facility of the lung. Now, non-invasive ventilator is another type of ventilation without intubation, which can be given by continuous positive airway pressure or in bilevel positive airway pressure. So now important thing to remember when we talk about CPAP or BiPAP is that there are certain types of patients in which we cannot give CPAP or BiPAP. So it's important to remember that patients must be conscious and should have airway protective reflexes which are present if you want to put the patient on a CPAP or a BiPAP. It's a mask, the NIV mask, what we call it, non-invasive ventilation mask. And there should be no indication for for surgery or transport from the floor if you are planning to put a patient on a NIV. Also, patients who have a lot of secretions are not good candidates for non-invasive ventilation. It should also be avoided in patients who are hemodynamically unstable and those who have impaired gastric emptying. Patient is paralytic ileus or there's bowel obstruction or pregnancy. In such cases, swallowing large amounts of air may result in vomiting and life-threatening aspiration. So, because there's a constant positive pressure to the mask, patients may be also liable to swallow some of the high pressure air that is coming in. It can go into the stomach and cause reflux and other things. Also, you should remember that the esophageal opening pressure is there. So the pressure, the peak pressure in this should not be going above the esophageal opening pressure. Okay. And because airway aspiration is a chance with this. Okay. So we should remember that for CPAP or BiPAP. Okay. Now, what are the benefits of mechanical ventilation? Of course, the benefit is that the patient doesn't have to work as hard, so the respiratory muscles get rest. Patient is allowed time to recover in hope that breathing becomes normal again. And for adequate oxygenation and also for clearing the carbon dioxide, ventilation plays a big role. And it preserves a stable airway and prevents injury from aspiration, especially if the patient is intubated, then aspiration we can prevent. What are the risks of mechanical ventilation? Now, infection is one of the common risks, as the airway, the breathing tube may allow germs to enter the lungs, and the risk of infection increases with time. Okay. Also, lung damage occurs if there is increased pressure on the lungs. So that is important to note. And also, there is altered physiology. There is cardio-musculoskeletal, endocrine, or renal. So these are the things which are to be remembered, that these are the risks of mechanical ventilation. Now, when mechanical ventilation is used, it is important to remember that it is a very intensive procedure and there is a lot of backup required when we use a ventilator. So there are a lot of procedures which are done. There are lots of medications which are used, and there are some procedures also which should be used when the patient is on a ventilator. So we need a good team and a backup. So there is suctioning, which is a procedure which is done to clear the secretions. So as you can see, there is a sealed closed suction system which is available, which can be used to prevent infections, to suck out the secretions from the endotracheal tube. Then there are aerosolized medications which can be given through inline nebulizers. And bronchoscopy is also there, which can be done on intubated patients to look for pathologies in the airway. Now, who are the caregivers who take care of the patients on mechanical ventilators? So it's important to have a good team. There is a physician who is usually an anesthesiologist, pulmonologist, or an intensivist. ICU care physicians, critical care physicians are very important in the management of ventilated patients. A nurse practitioner who is experienced helps the doctor to evaluate the patient and write orders for the therapy. And they are specially trained in the care of patients. For example, in our ICU, we use various scoring systems to ensure that DVT prophylaxis is given. There is bed sore prophylaxis prevention. So there are scores like the Braden score, which the nurses are using to evaluate whether the patient requires an airbed or not. So then there are various other bundles. There are these ventilator bundles, ventilator care bundles, which are used by the nursing staff as checklists to ensure that at every shift, these certain things are always checked for the patient. So these ventilator care bundles, Foley's care bundles, then the Braden scoring. These are some of the things that we use in the hospital to take care of our ventilated patients. Of course, along with that, support staff is very important. So we have ward boys who have special training in the care of these patients, because when you're turning the patient who is ventilated for sponging and all, we need to be very careful that their tubes do not get disconnected or they do not have any other problems. Then the respiratory physiotherapist is also very important part of the treatment to ensure that the lungs of the patients are well taken care of. And the patient care associate, basically we ensure that there is a relative of the patient who is a patient care associate who is knowing about what is to be done for these patients and who will help us in the care of the patients. Yeah, so thank you for that patient listening. I think we can now open the field for questions, and I think there are already some questions. So Dr. Jignesh, if you would like to take over and let.
Yeah, sir. Now Dr. Chirag Shah will be hand over this next session. Dr. Chirag Shah, Sir.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very nice session by Dr. S.P. Matthew. I had one or two questions. What are the lung protection strategies that you would deploy when a patient is on ventilator?
Yeah, lung protection strategies start from the very beginning itself. Initially, when the patient is assessed for what type of ventilation is to be used, from that stage itself to the part where we decide whether we are going to use a pressure cycle or a volume cycle, because as you know, there is more tendency for lung damage in patients with when we use volume cycle ventilation. Along with that, in the physiotherapy is also very important for the lung protection of the alveoli. And we also try to maintain a minimum PEEP. There is always a PEEP of around 2 to 4, which is always there to maintain that the alveoli remain open and do not shut down. Also, changing of position is very important to avoid stasis of secretions and things like that in the patient. So these are the some of the strategies. Anything else, Dr. Chirag, you would like to add on that?
No, maybe a lower tidal volumes, maybe around 4 to 6 ml per kg, possibly.
Yes, yes.
And early weaning if possible.
Yes, yes. In
And
fact,
after
in
that,
the ventilator bundle, we have the checklist to check for weaning every day.
weaning protocols, yes.
Yes.
And other thing was whether what are the strategies you use in a ICU for prevention of VAP, ventilator associated pneumonias?
Yeah. So that, in fact, our infection control team is very active in that, in the sense that the suctioning methods have to be very sterile when you are doing suction. So if at all possible, use the closed suction method, where the suction tube is in the closed chamber. And also ensuring absolute sterility, hand washing, hand hygiene by all the staff, nurses is very important. Keeping sterilium bottle at the foot end of every bed and making it a habit to follow the 5 points of hand hygiene. That is, I feel, very important for preventing VAP. In addition to that, also ensuring good physiotherapy.
Okay. Well, Dr. Jignesh, the house is open. Any other questions that anybody has,
Yeah.
Sir, more or less question inside that our chat box, please.
Yeah.
Check the
Okay.
chat box.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, please check the chat box.
Yeah. So
Your
there is a
question is
question
there.
asked to me regarding my experience with Corona, whether I took any antiviral drugs or any Ayurvedic medicines. So frankly, I did not take any antiviral medicines or any Ayurvedic medicines at all. I just took paracetamol, and that also I realized was not at all having any benefit except reducing my body pain. So the fever, I realized, is a mechanism whereby the body resets the thermostat of the body, which allows for the destruction of pathogens. So if you are an adult and you have the ability to withstand a bit of fever, I feel it is better that the fever continue till the time your body requires it, so that whatever is happening, it is doing something. The fever is doing something. It is probably destroying the pathogens. So I feel that it is best to allow the fever to be. If in my case, it lasted for 48 hours and then it totally went down. I took paracetamol 3 times in that time because I was having body pain. Other than that, I just took multivitamins. And because I know what it was.
There's a question from Dr. Ashok Sanghvi. How often have you come across atypical symptoms?
Yeah, very often. Many of the cases who come, like I was sharing just before, that we had a case of hypoglycemia who came with a sugar of 36 yesterday, 2 days back actually, with decreased appetite. That was his only symptom. But then his score, RT-PCR came positive. The patients who come with stroke and with myocardial infarctions, all of them we check for COVID, because the studies have shown that these people are more prone to COVID infections, are more prone to strokes and myocardial infarctions.
In fact, I'll share one of my experiences. I had a patient who did not have any history of fever, cough, or anything. He had just come with a history of unable to stand up. Basically, weakness in the thighs. So everything was evaluated. In fact, his HRCT was done. His CPK came to be around 800 to 900. So it looked like a myositis. So he was admitted for the same, seen by the neurologist, started on steroids.
Oh.
He remained, and suddenly on the second day of admission, he suddenly became breathless. And a florid was in his CT chest. Now, We did his RT-PCR came positive. So basically, it was a very atypical presentation. He had two CT scans done. A CT scan done at the time of admission, which was absolutely normal, and a CT scan done on the third day, which showed COVID-like symptoms. And the only presentation was myositis.
I think it is important for all of us to. Yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Dr. Sanghvi.
If patient is serious and if relatives are not willing to continue with ventilator, so can we remove ventilator legally?
Actually, we have something called as a advanced medical directive, which has to be taken from every ventilator patient or a patient before they go into a ventilator, where we ask the family, what is your decision, whether you want to go in for a ventilator or not. Before we put the patient on ventilator itself, we ask that question. And once the patient is on a ventilator, then as per the law of the land, it is very difficult to disconnect the ventilator medically. I think we can ask someone else in the audience, because there are some medico-legal aspects in that. So I am not an expert in the medico-legal aspects, probably, but it's a good question. If anybody else would like to volunteer on that, but I feel prevention is what we do.
So there is one more question from Dr. Akshay Nakrani. What are the indications for invasive mechanical ventilation in a COVID patient, and any cutoff in the ABG that you consider in the ABG?
Yeah. Just a minute. Before that, there are already some questions in the chat. Can we finish that? Do most of the portable ventilators suffice in majority of cases, or when are they indicator? Portable ventilators, by portable ventilators, I'm assuming you mean ventilators which have a power backup or a battery backup. Nowadays, most of the ventilators which are quite advanced in modes also have battery backup, and they are portable. So they are useful, and they will do in a majority of cases. If you are referring to the older generation of portable ventilators, I'm not sure, but the newer ones which are portable ventilators are battery backup. Most of them are quite advanced, and they are most of the modes which are required. How do you decide to whether patients require either BiPAP or ventilator? Yeah, so that already was addressed in one of the slides, where how do we decide whether patient requires a ventilator or a BiPAP? It is there in one of the slides, but I'll just repeat for the sake of this question that if a patient is conscious and his gag reflex and swallowing reflex are intact, then the patient is a candidate for a BiPAP. But if a patient doesn't have a gag reflex, is likely to aspirate, is not conscious, then that patient requires a intubation and proper ventilation. Okay. Those parameters of portable ventilator suffice majority of respiratory. What are indications of a portable ventilator? I think that is, portable ventilators are indicated for traveling, transporting patients. That's the only thing I can say over here. So during your illness, did you take regular steam? What is your opinion on steam? Steam is okay. I mean, see, if you're having a upper respiratory symptom like blockage of nose and things like that, steam is useful. So there is no harm in taking steam. What is an absolute contraindication of using a ventilator in a respiratory case? Absolute contraindication for using a ventilator in a respiratory case. Well, there's no absolute contraindication as such, unless you're thinking of patients who are coming to you with corona and you don't want to use a ventilator on that patient. But Dr. Chirag Shah, you want to add anything on that? What is the absolute contraindication of using ventilator in a respiratory case?
Probably if somebody has a fistula, that is what I can say. If somebody has a tracheostomy fistula or something like that. Otherwise, as you said, there is no absolute contraindication.
Yeah. Very informative, positive energy giving. That is nice. Thank you. What is our peptide going to be using ventilator? Like that same question. What are the indications for invasive mechanical ventilation in COVID patient? Any cutoff in ABG you consider? Dr. Akshay Nakrani, good question. Actually, I am not going to answer that question because I am not treating COVID patients at all on ventilator, and this is something totally new. But I feel the initial studies showed that we should avoid using invasive ventilation in COVID. Probably now the guidelines have changed. You want to share something, Dr. Nakrani? Dr. Akshay is there? Because that will be too much of a technical question for the audience here, I feel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
Hello.
hello.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah, it was a wonderful session. You have very good that you have good recovery. We are very glad to hear that. I think what I have seen and I have heard from the other intensivists is that the work of breathing is very important. The hypoxia will be there, as we all aware of. Saturation will be 80, 75, but the work of breathing is which decides whether we should put on the ventilator or not. If patient is really going into fatigue and into the near respiratory arrest, then we should not wait, and then that becomes the indication to put on ventilator. If patient is comfortable with hypoxia of say 70, saturation still low, but comfortable on NIV and all, may not still need a invasive ventilation.
Yeah, right.
Also add on something.
Yeah, so one more thing I wanted to add was that I also did my HRCT chest after the 2 weeks, and it was normal. And also I did my antibody test after 1 month was over, which is positive. And I also done antibody test on one of my RMOs who had tested positive for COVID in May. I did his antibodies again in October, May, June, July, August, September, October, 5 months. And his antibody levels have been maintained. So that is again one more thing which we are going to continue doing more studies on patients who tested positive, antibody positive, just to monitor their antibody levels. That will be a good source of information which we'll be planning to share in the coming days.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think so. No any more questions are remaining.
Yeah.
It's very interesting and informative question answer session. So thank
Yes.
you, Dr. S.P. Matthews sir and Dr. Chirag Shah sir. Now here I am requesting to our chairperson, Dr.
Thank
Ashok Sanghvi sir, to give the vote of thanks. Dr. Ashok Sanghvi sir.
Yeah, good afternoon. I am Dr.
Yes.
Ashok Sanghvi. I thank Dr. Matthew sir for giving us very nice and informative lecture. He has given us very nice tips about ICU and ventilator. During his own illness, he has only taken multivitamin tablet because he has very good immunity. He has given importance to spirituality and believing in God. Being more spiritual, our immunity increases. I thank once again Dr. Matthew sir on behalf of DMA and Team DMA. I thank DMA team to give me opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Dr. S.P. Matthews sir, one more question will be from the Dr. Hardik Agrawat. Respiratory acidosis in COVID patient. Any comments?
Yeah. Before that, thank you, sir, Dr. Ashok Sanghvi, for your kind words. And you have been practicing for the last, I think, more than 45 years here.
47.
Wow, 47 years. Wow. So well done. And you're still practicing, because many doctors have stopped practicing after the age of 60 because of COVID.
Yeah. I'm 72 at present.
Wow. Great. Well done.
I go 3 to 4 times a week.
Wow. So you're not scared of COVID?
No, sir.
Very good. Great example for all of us. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for
The question is
words.
thank you. The question is respiratory acidosis in COVID. Any comments? Uncompensated respiratory acidosis. Now again, that will be a bit of a technical talk for an audience like this. Maybe we can discuss that on personal chat or in the physicians group maybe. I think for the general practitioners, it's important to remember that ventilators are very useful in selected cases, and that it has to be used with proper care and with a proper team of people to look after, so that the patients get the maximum benefit. And also, before putting a patient on a ventilator, we have to make sure that the patient and the relatives are in for it, and they are able to also afford whatever is going to happen to the patient after that, so that we avoid unnecessary prolonging of life for patients for whom it will not benefit. So we need to be wise in that, and not just put every patient on a ventilator. That's what I personally feel. So, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. SP Matthew sir. Thank you, Dr. Ashok Sanghvi sir. Dear friends, today is the 13th webinar of our series, and Dr. SP Matthew sir is delivering excellent lecture to us and updating our knowledge about how he is overcome from the corona, and also give the simple tips about ICU and ventilator, which is really useful to us in our general practice. So thank you, Dr. SP Matthew sir, Dr. Chirag Shah sir, Dr. Rajendra Patil sir, Dr. Ashok Sanghvi sir, and the Dr. Vinayak sir. Behalf of Daisar Medical Association, here I am Dr. Jignesh Vasan Chauhan, announce the end of today's webinar session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, DMA.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.